It happens every single fall, and yet it always catches me off guard. I'm speaking, of course, about National Public Radio's membership and fundraising campaign. As a listener, what has always made me uncomfortable about these semi-annual fund drives is that their arguments for support make so much sense. One morning 10 years ago, just after we were married, Sarah and I were listening as one of the hosts began to make his pitch on a Saturday morning. Some of you, he said, listen to us every morning on the way to work, when you wake up, on your drive home in the evenings, even to our weekend programming. You are grateful for what we offer, and yet you have never made a pledge to support this station which gives you so much. We invite you to do that today. You'll feel better when you do. Sarah and I looked at each other as he perfectly described our lives with detailed precision. We made a pledge. We immediately felt better. I think that the Apostle Paul would have applauded the directness of this approach. You might not know that in addition to his vocations as a church planter and a gospel preacher, Paul was also a fundraiser. Part of Paul's mission, his God-given call, was to collect contributions from all over the wealthy cosmopolitan Roman world and deliver those contributions to the Christians living in Jerusalem. This collection was practical. The Christians, the church in Jerusalem, was a persecuted and impoverished minority. But it was also symbolic. It was to be a tangible demonstration of the unity of the Church of Jesus Christ and the generosity of its members. So Paul, in his letter to his congregation in Corinth, encourages members of the church to give generously to this worthy cause, promising that they will be blessed by their giving. They will feel better. In other words, what we have before us is Paul's stewardship letter for First Church Corinth, and I do mean First Church. And it goes something like this: God has provided you an abundance of blessings. Before we are ever givers, we are receivers of more than enough of everything. In response, we are called to be people of gratitude, responding to God's grace by cheerfully planting seeds of generosity that others may harvest, or even more simply put, God is generous, you should be too. Generosity, modeled after the gracious and unending love of God, is a hallmark of the Christian faith. It is a hallmark of Second Presbyterian Church, where the generosity of faithful members enables us to excel in ministry and in mission, where our present abundance meets the needs of others, where we embody the grace of God that we have received, and where we sense God's voice calling us to this very moment when our generosity might also be an investment in God's promise-filled future for this congregation and our community. Here's a question that has been on my mind in recent months. What makes people generous? Is it a sense of responsibility, of duty, of obligation? Is it a practice modeled and taught by our parents and grandparents in the faith? Is generosity genetic? Is it cultural? Is it traditional? Are people generous for practical reasons, like tax deductions? For spiritual reasons? What makes people generous? And as a secondary question, why are some people more generous than others? These questions are taken up by sociologists Christian Smith and Hilary Davidson in a book that our Lake Fellows are reading this month, The Paradox of Generosity. While Davidson and Smith have many encouraging conclusions, one disheartening find of their widespread research on all kinds of generosity is this: generosity is not our norm. In fact, Smith and Davidson discovered that we tend to think of ourselves as more generous than we really are. For example, the author's research indicates that less than 3% of Americans give away 10% or more of their income. Less than 3% tithe, while nearly 90% give less than 2%. What's interesting is that this pattern exists across all forms of generosity, not just financial giving, but our time and volunteer hours, our commitment, and the use of our gifts. The paradox is that this reality persists despite the clear and strong correlation between generosity and well-being. Those who are consistently generous experience a better sense of well-being, including, according to the authors, happiness, bodily health, purpose in living, avoidance of depression, sustained meaning through our aging process, and personal spiritual growth. Smith and Davidson offer this conclusion: the more generous one is, the better off one is. With all due respect to these two wonderful sociologists, I didn't need a 300-page book to tell me that. The Apostle Paul is just as clear in his assessment: the one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. You might have noticed it's stewardship season here at Second Presbyterian Church, and next Sunday we will be invited to dedicate our commitments, our giving goals for 2019. You know that those commitments will determine our capacity to dream for the year ahead, our ability to make plans for ministries and programs and mission partnerships, and to enable those creative ideas that are even now springing forth. In a time of transition and at the beginning of a new chapter, those commitments will also be a sign of our faith in God to guide the future as steadfastly as we have been led in the past. Over decades and centuries, responding to God's call and the felt promise of the moment, our mothers and fathers in the faith planted seeds in extraordinary ways through this church. They dug deep, and they discovered the blessing of generous giving. And as a direct result of that, the ministries and mission partnerships of Second Presbyterian Church have grown and flourished. And here's the part that you know is coming. Our generosity will enable those ministries and missions to continue. Like the pitch on National Public Radio, most stewardship sermons I have heard and many that I have preached over the years make this very practical point. It may not be the most comfortable topic, but the staff need salaries, and the parking lot needs replaced, and the mission partners need support, and the children need Bibles, and the website needs an update. And so the sermon goes something like this: if you benefit from all that happens here, we invite you to make a pledge so that we can meet our budget. Now look, that's true. And for some of us, it's all we need to hear. But messages of obligation tend to neglect the joy of generosity. For 27 years, K.C. Tomey was pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Nashville, Tennessee. When he retired, he was brought on as a distinguished professor in the practice of ministry and leadership at Austin Presbyterian Seminary in Texas. One stewardship season, a local congregation in Austin invited the Reverend Dr. Tomey to deliver the Stewardship Sermon, the capstone of their campaign. In the sermon, KC reflected on the reasons why people give generously. He began by ruling out some likely contenders, beginning with slick stewardship themes. He rules out guilt and shame, four-color brochures, comparing ourselves to others, and yes, he finally rules out stewardship sermons. So what does motivate generosity? According to that preacher, it's awareness. Deep awareness of the abundant and undeserved goodness of God. That'll do it. Consider how generous God has been to you. Really count your blessings, and that simple act will elicit generosity. Look with loving eyes at the faces of the children in our midst, and that will do it. Take a walk in the crisp, cool morning air. That will do it. Take the hand of your beloved and consider the gift of companionship, and that will do it. Take in the beauty of this sacred space on this music festival Sunday. Remember the babies who are baptized here, the weddings we've celebrated here, the saints whose lives we have honored here. Hear the power of music played on this magnificent organ, sung by these gifted choirs, and then go stand in McFarland Hall and consider the gifts of community that unite and uphold us. Ponder the satisfaction that comes from being part of a congregation of compassionate care for those within and beyond these walls. That will do it. That will motivate generosity. Paul's stewardship message. It's a call to generosity rooted in the abundant, overflowing grace of God. It is all about the joy of reckless generosity. Just scattering seeds bountifully and trusting that the harvest will come in time. Reckless generosity. In the providence of God, I got a picture of reckless generosity in my own home yesterday afternoon. I'd gone out to the grocery store, and when I got back, Sarah met me in the kitchen, and she said, "I want to tell you an amazing story about something Samuel did while you were gone." Sam is our 5-year-old son. It turns out that just as I drove out of the driveway, our doorbell rang. Waiting on our front steps were 3 Carmel High School students, 3 girls. They had a flyer in their hand promoting upcoming events in support of Riley Children's Hospital, and they had come to share with us the importance of that work and an opportunity to give. Samuel was standing just behind Sarah as she had the conversation with these high school students until he darted up the stairs to his room and came back with 1 quarter. He handed it to those high school students and he said, "I know what you were talking about. You need money." grateful but a little embarrassed, the students thanked Samuel for the gift but assured him that it wasn't necessary for him to give his quarter to this possibility, this opportunity. Samuel's response was this: "You can have that quarter. I have another one upstairs." Reckless generosity, a call to give with eagerness and joy, sensing the possibility of this time. But thanksgiving for what we have received is not the only reason we give. There is a brilliant double meaning in Paul's powerful phrase, "The one who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully." And here's that double meaning. We stand on both sides of that equation. We begin as receivers, gifted by the generosity of those before us and those around us. We remember those on whose foundation we seek to build, and we give thanks. And then we ourselves sow bountifully. We give from our abundance so that others may receive as well. Even as we reap the harvest of seeds previously planted, we are called now to plant seeds of faith and hope. As we entered this season of commitment, one of you sent me this Greek proverb: "A society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in." Of course, the same is true of a church. As we prepare for another year of ministry at Second, the opportunities for bountiful sowing are unlimited. I hope you sense, as I do, that we stand on the threshold of a new beginning, and that how we choose to embrace this moment will determine the future ministry of our church. There are challenges as we consider the landscape of the church in our time, and I promise you this: every single one is a challenge that I welcome. The challenge to articulate a compelling faith to the next generation, the challenge of serving a changing community of neighbors, the challenge to speak a word of hope in a time of despair, to offer words of unity in a time of division. Our call to generous giving must not be primarily about meeting budget goals. It is a God-given invitation to deeper joy, to more abundant living, to a purpose greater than ourselves, to a future beyond our limited vision. It is about trusting the kind of reckless generosity that trusts God's grace more than our plans. Now, I promise that, like the NPR pledge drive, this sermon will be over soon, though there is much more I have to say. Next week, we will make our commitments to Second Presbyterian Church for the year ahead. Much depends on those commitments. Brothers and sisters, at Second, my message to you is this: whatever you do, don't stop planting those seeds. Reckless generosity. It is a stewardship theme directly drawn from Paul's theology. It is a vision for the future of the church. I can hardly wait to see what kind of dreams will be grown in this place, thanks to the seeds that we will plant. So now is the time, Second, to take hold of the life that is really life and scatter the seeds of faith in bold and generous ways. Amen.